So risky business, building elasticity and resilience. And I am joined by Roy Anderson, who is our featured guest as usual. He is adjunct professor at Northeastern University. Do you want to give a short introduction to yourself, Roy, for those of you who don't know him?
Sure. 40 plus years in the industry, starting with Raytheon, going to become chief procurement officer at companies like John Hancock as they went public, MetLife as they went global, State Street Bank as they went through transformations. Did my own company for a while and teamed up with Anders frequently for opportunities to discuss next generation activity.
Wonderful. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Anders Lillevik. I'm the founder of Focal Point. And similar to Roy, I have a long career in procurement. I was chief procurement officer for companies like Fannie Mae, QBE, Webster Bank, Citizens Bank, and so on. So I got most of my stripes in financial and insurance services sectors. And if you guys want to drop in the chat where you guys are calling in from and why you care about this topic, that would be fantastic. Otherwise, we will just start rocking on. So Maya, if you could go to today's objectives. So today, we want to talk about how procurement can look at reducing risk and supply chain resilience, and build supply chain resilience by doing stuff right internally within procurement. And that basically means building redundancy and smarter strategies to sort of meet the needs of today, as well as the needs of tomorrow. And Roy, do you want to maybe add to this very quickly about what you see resilience in procurement to be?
Yes. So the concept of the industry today, the world economy today, the impact, whether you're in the manufacturing sector, direct materials or indirect materials, there is radical changes happening in every step, in every category of activity. So as a chief procurement officer, you need to be able to prepare for these rapid changes. You need to have the skill sets developed to be able to support that activity. And I'll tell you, this is a very active area. You can't just sit passively and see it happening. You've got to actively perform work in order to prepare your organization for that resiliency.
All right. And do you think people outside of procurement fully understand what that means for us procurement folks?
No, until the product doesn't show up or the service doesn't happen or impacts to your pricing structure is negatively impacting your profitability. They turn around going, hey, who's responsible for this? And lo and behold, here's procurement trying to drive these contractual changes and not getting the support that they need. Now, hey, I'm not blaming anyone else. It's up to us. I always tell CPOs, the first problem is the person looking at you in the mirror in the morning. If you're not up for the job, make sure you hire the people that are up for the job to be able to make those things happen. We have to stand on our own with our own skill sets and capabilities in order to be able to drive this activity and to be able to market the value proposition we bring to the table. I mean, that's part of the play, is that we have to let people know what we can do and then do it.
Couldn't agree more. So let's move on to topic number one. So data. Procurement loves data, right? And it's kind of the backbone of everything that we do. So, Roy, how do you think about data and access to data in today's environment?
It's sad. Now, some of the companies out there, hey, you're doing a great job. What you've done is digitized your entire order to pay process. So you now have accurate information in terms of what you historically spent with the right supplier information, category structure, pricing activity, definitions of those products and services that you bought. Congratulations, you're at step one of this activity. For the rest of you that are still using invoicing and people keying in invoices in order to get the things paid, you'll find that your data is horrific. It doesn't give you the information. It actually sends you off in wrong directions. It is crucial that you realize that your digitization of your process, literally from need through payment, that's source through pay, name your definition. But how do you find the need? How do you look for future activity? How you go through the sourcing, negotiation, order processing, payment activity? That's just gets you your data you need to start working for for the next generation. The next generation is say, now that I know what I bought in the past, is it going to match what I buy in the future? I would say 60, 70% match, but the rest of it's brand new every year. And then it's up to you to be able to drive risk mitigation based upon that activity, those changes, in order to support your internal customers, because they're at the whim of the environment, the economy, the government changes, the impact of wars and conflicts around the world. But it's up to us to understand our suppliers, not only first-tier suppliers, but how do we get to second and third-tier suppliers when you're now talking about 1 million suppliers in that impact zone that you need to get to.
And I think one of the topics that in this topic, we say access to centralized data as sort of the key. Like, I think a lot of companies have data somewhere in the organization, but getting your hands on it in an organized way becomes the Herculean task. And I was chief procurement officer for a very large global company at some point in time, not that long ago, actually. And just to get accurate spend data for your suppliers involved going into 3 different ERPs globally to ferret out that data. And then without a normalized supplier naming convention across those ERPs, it was always wrong. Or it required a lot of scrutiny to just get there. And the data exists, but getting to it was hard. And I think that becomes the challenge, right? So how do you sort of see technology coming into the fore here?
Well, we are doing a much better job of having spend analytics tools and orchestration tools that allow us to pull that data from multiple systems. So you have the APIs that made the data flow into much easier. But as I mentioned, that's 60% of your future spend is an indication of your historical spend. But the rest is you need to be able to meet with your internal customers, know where are their budgets. So now you're talking about, how do I get access to the next generation budgets, next year's budgets, in order to understand what requirements they're going to have going forward, not only just next year, but the year after, because some of our efforts to be able to get the right supplier, and what I mean by the right supplier is not just a good price, that's key, optimal holistic cost structure, but the right supplier in terms of innovation. Is this going to be the supplier that's going to take us to where we're the leader for our customer base? Are this a supplier that is mitigating risk because of how they spread their manufacturing or service portfolio to be able to have better solution sets? So it takes time to find those suppliers that are around the world that are going to meet the expectations of your internal customers, not only today, but for the next 2 or 3 years, and then exceed the expectations of your external customers, which is what it's all about, to drive that revenue. But so that's the other big chunk of your work, is not just historical, tough enough, but let's start being predictive. Let's start understanding what people need. That's when we start adding real value.
Amazing. I couldn't possibly agree more. All right, on to topic number 2. And this is all about procurement systems, right? So how now one of my esteemed colleagues like to mention the fact that when you and I were in procurement, Roy, there was maybe like 10 procurement system, and now there's like 400 procurement systems, right? So now, like, how should we think about the capable, flexible procurement system in the role of becoming the resiliency driver for procurement and reducing the risk?
Okay, now in this discussion, we're spending most of our time talking about the actual technology, right? Not the operating system, that people and all that, but the technology that's required. One, ease of use. Let's be clear. Our internal customers, again, whether it's a bill of material on the direct side or every internal employee on the indirect side, it's got to be easy to use, or they don't use it. If they don't use it, you're basically stopped in the water. You don't have any momentum, because if you're constantly telling the individual why it's important, they're going, it's hard to use. I'm not using stuff that doesn't make my life easier. So your system has to be intuitive. It has to meet the expectations of the internal customer at the level that they're at. And there are individuals that are extremely competent, capable, getting things done. And then there's a whole list of people that just don't have that skill set. So our goal here is, 1, ease of use. 2 is the fact that we can bring suppliers into the system quickly as the environment changes. It should not be painful for a supplier to be able to do business with us. It should actually make it easier. I'm a big believer that I want to be the low cost customer. That means I want to make it so easy for my best suppliers that they'll put me before anyone else because I'm easier to work with, I'm faster to work with, I'm more open, more transparent, that they're more profitable, even though we get lower holistic cost structure, but we've stripped away the pain and suffering of doing this business.
That's that's right on. I think you're absolutely right. The other thing that I also keep thinking about is the flexibility of a solution to be able to sort of flex with the needs, right? Because typically what you and I have done traditionally is to sort of say, all right, what are my requirements, right? And that's all we really have to go by. Like, what are my requirements today? But we seldom think about what will my requirements be in the future. And it's very nebulous for us to think about that. So when I think about a flexible procurement solution, it's about how can I take solutions that I have today and maybe not repurpose them, but add capabilities to do things without it taking a year to implement, costing me another $1 million to do. So that's the flexibility and agility of procurement solutions that I look for today. And how does that fit with what you're seeing out there?
Yeah, that's critical. Speed of implementation. And I use the metric is how do you get to 90% penetration? So I can get the tool up and running in a week, but if it takes me a year to get 90% penetration, which means all the work that should be going into that tool set is not getting into it, I don't have penetration for that capability. Therefore, I'm not receiving the benefit that has been defined. So I always like to say getting it up and running is step one, but getting it implemented to the point where there's utilization at 90% of the activity is critical for that success. So and now as you deal with your company's growing and developing and changing. They're adding other countries to their customer base. They're adding other countries to their supplier base. They're adding other capabilities. You need to have a technology that's going to be able to reach out to those new languages, those new currencies, those new policies, procedures, taxes, all those things, all those regulations have to be able to come into your organization and be readily available. So the technology is crucial to make that happen without throwing lots of people, which you don't have available into the mix.
And I'll add to that too. You talked about geographical expansion, but also in procurement, we are very used to having regulators throwing stuff at us or the board throwing stuff at us and so on and so forth. So it's all about, all right, now I need to look at, I don't know, financial stability assessments. How can we add that to the solution? Now we need to look at diverse suppliers. How can we add that to the solution? Now we need to look for conflict minerals. How can we add that? How anti-modern slavery? I can go on and on and on. But I know there are point solutions for each and every one of these things, but you really don't want to be in 65 different point solutions. You want to be in one spot, really.
Right.
And maybe you can build it within that one spot solution, or you can call out to those systems, for the information.
Yeah, and we need to make sure that our internal customers are being communicated with real time. They feel more comfortable. I tell my students at Northeastern, said, if I had 60 sourcing experts, they would have 10 plus projects going on at any point in time. And that's 600 projects with 10 internal customers. That's 6,000 internal customers that are looking for information. Where are my contracts? When they're going to be coming due? What have my suppliers responded? So the ability to be transparent in that process, to give them the information they need to be able to do their job and feel comfortable I'm getting my job done in a timely manner is critical. And then on the back end, the Monday morning quarterbacks are everywhere, right? Oh, why did you make that decision? Well, if you have the data, you can clearly show people why you made the decisions you made based upon the criteria that were provided and the information that's there. That's a huge win to have everyone realize they know what they're doing, they know why they did what they're doing, and they're optimizing the solution for every customer inside the company.
Amazing. As we get into topic number 3, I would like to mention that if there are any questions, comments, concerns from the audience, please enter them in the chat and we will address them as they come. But topic number 3, and this is maybe more for me than for you, but like, what are some use cases that can illustrate solution flexibility to help us support this resiliency we're talking about?
Yeah, I'm hoping you got a nice couple in your back pocket there for me there, Anders.
Sure. So what we have found interesting is by putting in together, focal point. Number one, we have all the data sort of normalized into one spot. So you can double click on a supplier, for instance, and you can see the spend, the payment behavior, the contracts, the projects they're working on, the risk behavior, the stakeholders, and you can go on and on and on. We can also pull in third-party data and so on and so forth. But we also have a flexible workflow studio where people can model pretty much any workflow that they want. So we've had some customers who let us handle all the innovation or all the implementation, and we thought that was great at the beginning. But what we have seen when we have other folks that are basically training themselves, or we train them to modify the solution or to configure the solution, they have found ways to use the solution in ways that we never even thought about. So we have one customer who does supplier invoice reconciliation in one spot. So no longer does that get done on the desk besides, the solution, and the journal entry gets put in with notes. They literally bring the item into focal point. They collaborate on the journal entry, decide like, do we amend the PO? Do we do a JAE? Or do we push back at the supplier? And everything is done in one spot and with full auditability, right? And then it gets resolved in the system of choice, depending on the action you take. They set this up on their own without our involvement, which is incredibly powerful. The other one that I always thought was interesting too was the whole idea of, we have one customer who is using the risk assessments within focal point for their suppliers. And the risk organization really enjoy doing that. So they can get the inherent risk questionnaire, and then they can do follow-up things within, like collecting SOC 2s, W9, insurance certificates, whatever the case may be. But the risk organization said, this is pretty cool. Can we also use this as we are onboarding new customers? This is a law firm, and the law firm basically has to look at what actions are they currently litigating across the portfolio to make sure there's no conflict. So they wanted an intake solution for their customers. And they exposed focal point to their customer base to answer an inherent risk questionnaire for them to be onboarded. And that allows, again, the risk organization to work in one place without having to go outside for another solution for that. And they were using smart sheets before to do that. So think about the different user experience of sending a smart sheet to a customer versus sending them a link to say, can you fill this out, please, right? And everything gets automatically scored. But the other sort of flexibility things is as we were adding, processes to the supplier management, for example, or supplier onboarding, for example. So you can think about doing one more due diligence check, or doing fourth-party risk surveys, those kinds of things. And it's relatively simple to set up, all right, here is a supplier, and here are their third parties that we need to manage, so on and so forth. And we can send a survey out to the supplier and say, all right, what are your dependent third parties that we are dependent on? And not only can we collect information, we can also collect things like website addresses, and then we can pull out a bunch of information about the fourth parties as well. And then we can say to a customer, okay, here's your business process. Here's your direct suppliers that you're dependent on. Here's they are dependent on to make that happen. It becomes very sort of robust and enlightening, as you sort of thought, well, I only thought I was dependent on 2 or 3 suppliers. Well, that's not the case. You're probably dependent on 15 suppliers, 14 of which you don't have a contract with, which is also kind of interesting, right? So it elevates that risk perspective significantly. That is just a small subset of the things that people come to us with their original problem and don't think about all the tertiary use cases that can be deployed without adding cost or without adding manpower to it, which is super powerful.
Wow, that's why I like the work that you're doing at Focal Point, because transparency across a broader spectrum of the organization will allow you to be significantly more flexible. So for example, spend analytics is crucial underneath. You feed that in. All your contracting activity says these are the things that are happening right now that we can actually make a difference on. So as a risk issue, which you get feedback on, says we're having a problem in this geographic area or for this category type, you have access to saying, hey, we're using other suppliers for similar items in other geopolitical areas or other parts of the company. And now, why don't we take the contract we're working on today, which you would never have known before, and be able to adjust real time as you understand the risks, so that you not only provide mitigating support for other areas of the company, but then you're eliminating the risk on going with an old supplier that is irrelevant or a higher risk picture. This transparency is what it's all about.
Right. No, I couldn't agree more. That used to drive me crazy as a CPO to go all over hell's acres for information, even if assuming that it existed, of course. Right. So getting it to before is key. The last topic, and this is for you, Roy, is what sorts of future functionalities do we envisage that will help us be even more resilient and reduce more risk?
So there is so much going on. Now let's start from where we were before. Digitization of your processes are critical. Without digital process and data, you're in trouble. But on top of that, you start getting into things like digital twins. So now I can show the flow of work or services deep inside, not only first tier, second tier, third tier, where we're required, not everywhere, but where necessary. So in the pharmaceutical industry, they're finding their drugs all the way down to the base product, no matter how many suppliers down the line. Food products, cannabis solutions, they're getting real good at getting into second and third tier data, and then be able to track that data not only through the first level manufacturing and the distribution and the shipping activity and the warehousing, but being able to bring it all the way to where the customer has it. So when things go wrong, they can see not only where, but where do they have to fix. They can actually start jumping on things earlier in the process to open up massive savings opportunities where they didn't realize they were having such a loss, or speed the shipping, or eliminate the inventory, eliminate costs, because we don't need that new warehouse because our data is now showing we can deliver it more effectively going around that warehouse, therefore lowering cost structure. Tied to that is this whole concept of blockchain. How that ends up at the end, I'm not positive. Okay, so that's kind of new. There's blockchain everywhere, but it's changing radically to try to be less energy intensive. But the idea is that you can actually feed the data and then be able to have better analysis. And I'm thinking about the concept of saying, hey, rather than having a contract purchase order invoice for your tier 3, tier 2, tier 1, at some point in time, we're all going to know that they're shipping, and we're knowing that what their contract says. So payment should happen automatically without all this other back and forth documentation. It should be more streamlined in that process. Then on top of that, all those activities are driving data, massive amounts of data, which is where agentic AI is going to be able to show us how to dig deep into the data, finding areas of opportunity, finding areas that we never realized were possible because humans could not dig through that data that fast. I'll give you an example. In the educational space, there are 1 million research papers a year of incredible insight that no one can read or understand. But all that is going to be made available in the AI world and be able to pull out those knowledge points that we can take action on. And only with the power of AI are we going to be able to take advantage of that. So that's all starts with digital data and then digital twins into AI agents that are going to be able to give us actionable data.
Amazing. We went 23 minutes without mentioning AI. So congratulations. I think that's a new record for all of us.
Really?
But I think the functionality that we're seeing more and more of is the interconnectivity of solutions, right? Using an old technology called API. And it's fascinating to me that a lot of solution providers are sort of given the Heisman of saying like, no, don't connect to my systems. as a matter of strategy to sort of say, well, I have all these functionality, don't let anybody in. And I think that's going to be a solution killer for the future, right? If you can't connect to other things to drive processes forward, you're going to get left behind. And I see a lot of frustration for customers who have picked solution providers that basically don't have open APIs, or the APIs are so limited that they're essentially useless. So I think that's going to be continuing now, to have more and more open architectures so that people can share information and progress things faster and faster.
Yeah, and you know, as we mentioned earlier, there were just 10 or 20 tools in the past. There are 400 going on 4,000 tomorrow. Those tools are very, very capable, but they need to talk. So open APIs, the ability to move data between systems is going to be instrumental in those organizations that are going to be able to optimize their supply chain solutions.
Amazing. So with that, guys, we are now at the tail end of this program. Next topic 5 is going to all be about ESG and beyond. So the other stuff that procurement has to worry about that does not necessarily show up in our job description, or I guess it does sometimes, but not always. If there's any comments, questions, concerns, you can drop them in the chat or reach out to Roy and I directly. But thanks a lot for everybody's participation and showing up today, and have a great rest of your week.
Have fun. Thanks, Anders.
Thanks, guys.